At my sister's wedding reception, my uncle laughed. "Still driving that old car?" I said, "No, I just funded the startup that rejected her husband." The words left my mouth before I could stop them, cutting through the clinking of champagne flutes and the soft hum of a string quartet playing something by Vivaldi in the corner of the Grand Bellamy Hotel ballroom. My Uncle Randall stood frozen mid-laugh, his bourbon halfway to his lips, ice cubes still settling. My sister Natalie, radiant in her Vera Wang gown with the cathedral train she'd spent 11 months obsessing over, turned from her conversation with a bridesmaid and stared at me with an expression I'd never seen on her face before. It was somewhere between horror and recognition, like she'd always known this moment was coming, but had prayed it wouldn't arrive on this particular night. Her new husband, Graham Ashworth, handsome and polished in his custom Tom Ford tuxedo, set down his glass of Perrier Jouet so carefully you'd think it was made of paper. His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowed, and in that fraction of a second, before anyone else at table 4 had fully processed what I'd said, I watched the mask he'd been wearing for 3 years slip just enough to show what was underneath. Then it was back. The charming smile, the easy posture, the effortless confidence of a man who believed the world owed him everything and had spent his entire life collecting on that debt. I should back up. My name is Owen Sunderland. I'm 36 years old, and for most of my adult life, I've been the family afterthought, the reliable one, the one who shows up on time, brings the right wine, remembers birthdays, never causes scenes. I'd been running a small but profitable data analytics consulting firm out of Bellevue, Washington for 9 years when all of this started. Nothing flashy, no corner office in a glass tower. Just me, 3 employees, a handful of loyal clients, and a reputation for being the guy who could untangle any dataset and find the story buried inside. I drove a 12-year-old Subaru Outback with a dent in the passenger door and 186,000 miles on the odometer. I lived in a modest 2-bedroom apartment overlooking a parking garage. I wore the same rotation of button-downs and khakis to every family event. And every single time I walked into a room full of Sunderlands, I could feel the collective assessment ripple through the crowd. Owen. Still doing the computer thing. Still single. Still driving that car. My parents, Arthur and Diane Sunderland, weren't cruel people. They were just thoroughly, reflexively impressed by surface-level success, and Graham Ashworth had surface-level success in abundance. He was 6'2" with the kind of jaw that belonged on a cologne advertisement. He'd gone to Wharton for his MBA, worked at a boutique consulting firm in Manhattan for 4 years, then moved to Seattle to quote-unquote pursue entrepreneurial opportunities. He drove a matte black Porsche Cayenne. He wore watches that cost more than my annual rent. He spoke in the fluid, confident cadence of someone who had never once doubted that the universe was organized primarily for his benefit. Natalie met Graham at a charity gala in the fall of 2021. She was 28, working as a marketing coordinator at a mid-sized healthcare company, making decent money, living a normal life. Graham swept in like a weather system. Within 6 weeks, they were inseparable. Within 4 months, he'd moved into her apartment. Within 8 months, he proposed with a 3-carat oval diamond at a restaurant where the tasting menu started at $400 per person. Our parents were ecstatic. Our mother called me the night of the engagement, breathless with excitement. He's perfect for her, Owen. Ambitious, driven, connected. His family has a house in Nantucket. A house in Nantucket. She said it like it was a cure for cancer. I congratulated Natalie, shook Graham's hand, smiled through the engagement party at our parents' house in Mercer Island, the sprawling craftsman with the lake view that my father had bought with his orthopedic surgery practice money. Graham held court that evening, telling stories about his Wharton days, his consulting projects, his vision for the future. Everyone leaned in. Everyone laughed at his jokes. Everyone was dazzled. I stood by the kitchen island eating shrimp cocktail and watching with the quiet unease of someone who'd spent his entire career reading data, spotting patterns, and identifying anomalies. Graham Ashworth was an anomaly. I just couldn't prove it yet. The first red flag came 5 months before the wedding. It was a Thursday evening in March 2023. I was at my office reviewing a client's quarterly analytics report when Natalie called, her voice strained in a way I recognized from childhood, the sound she made when she was trying not to cry. "Hey," she said, "can I ask you something? And you have to promise not to tell Mom and Dad." I promised. She explained that Graham had asked her to co-sign a loan, not a small one, $225,000 secured against her apartment to fund a startup he was launching with a college friend. The startup was called Meridian Dynamics, some kind of AI-driven supply chain optimization platform. Graham had been talking about it for months at family dinners, pitching it with the same polished confidence he brought to everything. But this was the first I'd heard about needing Natalie's financial involvement. "He says it's just temporary," she told me. "Once they close their seed round, they'll pay off the loan, and my name comes off everything. He says investors are lined up. He just needs bridge capital." My stomach tightened. "How much of your own savings would be at risk?" I asked. She was quiet for a moment. "All of it," she admitted. "My apartment equity is basically everything I have." I told her I wanted to look into Meridian Dynamics before she signed anything. She hesitated, said Graham might not like that, said he was private about his business dealings. I told her I wasn't asking for his permission. I was asking for hers. She gave it, reluctantly. That night, I started digging. The first thing I did was search for Meridian Dynamics in every startup database I had access to. Crunchbase, PitchBook, AngelList, state business registrations. I found the Delaware LLC filing from January 2023. 2 members listed, Graham Ashworth and a man named Philip Renner. I searched for Philip Renner. Wharton MBA, class of 2016, same as Graham. Previously worked at a fintech startup in New York that had folded after 18 months. No LinkedIn activity since 2021. No published work, no conference appearances, no digital footprint suggesting active involvement in any company. I checked Meridian's website. It was a single landing page with stock photos, buzzwords about disrupting supply chain management through proprietary AI algorithms, and a contact form. No team page, no product demo, no case studies, no press coverage. I searched for any patent filings, technical papers, or code repositories associated with Meridian Dynamics or either founder. Nothing. I ran Graham's name through court records in New York, Washington, and Delaware. Nothing criminal, but I found 2 civil cases from 2019 and 2020. Both were breach of contract suits filed against Graham by former business partners, one in Manhattan, one in Connecticut. Both had been settled out of court, terms undisclosed. I found a 3rd case from 2018, a lawsuit filed by a woman named Catherine Bellingham against Graham Ashworth for fraud related to an investment in a company called Apex Venture Group. That case had also been settled, but the filing documents were detailed. Catherine alleged that Graham had solicited $180,000 from her for an investment opportunity that turned out to be non-existent, that the company had no real operations, no real product, and no real employees. She alleged that Graham had used the money for personal expenses, including a lease on a luxury vehicle and a down payment on a condominium. I read Catherine Bellingham's complaint 3 times, my coffee going cold on my desk. Then I printed it out and put it in a folder. I told myself it could be a misunderstanding. People get sued. Settlements happen. Maybe Graham had a messy past, but had genuinely changed. I wanted to believe that because Natalie loved him, and I loved Natalie. But the data told a different story. The pattern was clear. Graham Ashworth found people with money or access to money, presented himself as an irresistible opportunity, extracted what he could, and moved on when things collapsed. The consulting career, the Wharton network, the Porsche, the Nantucket family house, it was all scaffolding around a hollow structure. I called Natalie the next morning. I told her what I'd found. I was careful, factual, unemotional. I sent her the court documents. I explained the pattern. I asked her to wait, to get an independent financial advisor to review the loan agreement before she signed. She listened. She said she'd think about it. Then she told Graham. He called me that same afternoon. His voice was ice. "Owen," he said, "I understand you've been looking into my background. I appreciate the protective brother instinct, but I need you to understand something. What you found is out of context. Catherine Bellingham was a disgruntled investor who didn't understand the risks she was taking. The lawsuits were frivolous. I settled because it was cheaper than fighting. And Meridian Dynamics is a legitimate company with real technology and real investors. You're a data consultant, not a forensic accountant. Stay in your lane." I told him I wasn't trying to interfere with his business. I was trying to protect my sister's financial security. He laughed. "Your sister is about to marry me," he said. "Her financial security is my responsibility now, not yours." Click. That conversation changed everything. Not because of what Graham said, but because of what happened afterward. Natalie stopped calling me, stopped responding to my texts. When I showed up at Sunday dinner at our parents' house 2 weeks later, she barely looked at me. Graham was there, arm around her shoulders, laughing with my father about golf handicaps. When I tried to pull Natalie aside after dinner, she shook her head. "Graham told me what you did," she whispered, going through his legal records, trying to dig up dirt. "He's my fiancé, Owen. You had no right." I told her I had the right to care about her. She said caring didn't look like running background checks on the man she loved. She asked me to drop it. I dropped it. For a while. I went back to my work, my clients, my routine. I watched from a distance as wedding preparations escalated. Venue booked at the Grand Bellamy Hotel, $45,000 for the reception alone. Custom invitations, imported flowers, a 12-piece band. Our parents were covering most of it. My mother kept sending me photos of centerpiece options and asking my opinion, which I gave, and updates about Graham's startup progress, which I didn't ask for. "He's closing a funding round," she told me in June. "Some big Silicon Valley investors. He's going to be huge, Owen. You should talk to him about it. Maybe he could use your data skills." I smiled and said nothing, but I kept watching. And what I watched was Meridian Dynamics raising absolutely no money. I checked every VC database, every funding announcement platform, every SEC filing. Nothing. No seed round, no angel investors, no term sheets filed anywhere. Whatever Graham was telling my family about his startup's progress, it wasn't reflected in any public record or industry source I could find. In August 2023, 9 months before the wedding, I made a decision that would eventually change everything. I was at a tech networking event in Seattle, one of those rooftop cocktail things where founders pitch to investors and everyone pretends the miniature crab cakes are adequate dinner. I ran into a woman named Priya Chakravarti, a venture capitalist at Sequoia West Partners. We'd worked together 3 years earlier when I'd done analytics consulting for one of her portfolio companies. Smart, direct, no tolerance for nonsense. Over drinks, I mentioned Meridian Dynamics casually, asked if she'd heard of it. She hadn't. I described the concept, AI-driven supply chain optimization. She was interested. Good market, she said. Growing demand. Who's behind it? I told her Graham Ashworth and Philip Renner, both Wharton graduates. She said she'd look into it. 2 weeks later, Priya called me. Owen, she said, her voice careful. This company doesn't exist. Not in any meaningful sense. There's no technical co-founder, no engineering team, no prototype, no minimum viable product. The AI they claim to have developed, there's no evidence of it anywhere. No patents, no papers, no GitHub repositories, no technical advisors. Philip Renner appears to be a name on a piece of paper. I've reached out to 3 people in his supposed network, and none of them have heard from him in over 2 years. One of them thinks he moved to Thailand. This is either the most stealth startup I've ever encountered, or it's vaporware being used to raise money from people who don't know how to do due diligence. I thanked her. She asked me why I was interested. I told her my sister's fiancé was behind it. Long silence. Owen, she said, if your sister is putting money into this, she needs to stop. I know, I said. But I didn't go to Natalie. Not yet. Instead, I did something I'd never done before. I started building a case. Not a legal case, although that would come later. An information case. A comprehensive, documented, verifiable record of everything Graham Ashworth had done, was doing, and was planning to do. I treated it like the most important analytics project of my career, because it was. I hired a licensed private investigator named Douglas Fujimoto, 22 years of experience, former FBI financial crimes analyst, now running his own firm in Portland. I told him everything I knew and asked him to fill in the gaps. Douglas was methodical and thorough. Over the next 4 months, he uncovered a pattern that was both staggering and heartbreakingly predictable. Graham Ashworth had been running variations of the same scheme for almost a decade. After Wharton, he'd started Apex Venture Group, the company Catherine Bellingham had sued him over. He'd raised $340,000 from 4 individual investors for a supposed fintech platform. The company never built anything. The money went to Graham's lifestyle, his apartment in the West Village, his car lease, his travel. When investors started asking questions, he dissolved the company and settled the one lawsuit that materialized. Then came a venture called Sterling Logic in 2020, registered in Connecticut. Same playbook. AI-powered analytics for healthcare. Raised $200,000 from 2 investors, both personal contacts from his Wharton network. Company folded after 8 months. No product ever built. One investor filed a complaint with the Connecticut Attorney General, but didn't pursue litigation. Then, Meridian Dynamics. Same structure, same promises, same hollow core. But this time, the target wasn't outside investors. It was my sister. Douglas also uncovered something I hadn't expected. Graham's family wealth, the Nantucket house, the old money pedigree he projected, was largely fabricated. His parents, Donald and Constance Ashworth, lived in a modest colonial in Westport, Connecticut. His father was a retired insurance adjuster. His mother taught piano lessons. They were comfortable, solidly middle class, but they weren't the wealthy blue bloods Graham implied they were. The Nantucket house belonged to a distant cousin, and Graham had visited it exactly twice, both times as a teenager. The Porsche was leased, the watches were financed. The Tom Ford suits were bought on credit cards that were, according to Douglas's research, carrying a combined balance of over $89,000. Graham Ashworth wasn't a wealthy entrepreneur who was building something revolutionary. He was a con artist who was running out of marks and had found the biggest one yet in my sister, and, by extension, my family. I compiled everything into a file, 142 pages of documents, court records, financial analyses, investor complaints, corporate filings, interview transcripts from Douglas's conversations with former associates and victims. I had it reviewed by an attorney named Helen Nakamura, a corporate fraud specialist at Whitfield and Associates in Seattle, 18 years of practice, former assistant U.S. attorney for the Western District of Washington. She read the file over a weekend and called me on Monday morning. You have enough here for a referral to the FBI, she said. Wire fraud, securities fraud, potentially mail fraud depending on how he solicited investors. This is serious. I told her I wasn't ready to go to the FBI yet. I wanted to try one more time to reach my sister. Helen was quiet for a moment. Owen, she said, I understand the family dynamics at play here, but you need to understand something. If your sister co-signs that loan and Graham defaults, which based on this pattern he almost certainly will, she loses everything. Her apartment, her savings, her credit. And if she invests directly in Meridian Dynamics, that money is gone. There's nothing to invest in. It's a shell company. I tried to reach Natalie. I called her in December 2023, asked if we could meet for coffee, just the 2 of us. She agreed, but when I arrived at the cafe in Capitol Hill, she was guarded, arms crossed, eyes wary. She knew why I was there. I laid it out as gently as I could. The court records, the pattern, the lack of any real product at Meridian Dynamics, Douglas Fujimoto's findings, Catherine Bellingham's lawsuit, the Connecticut complaint. I showed her the documents on my laptop, scrolling through pages of evidence while she sat across from me getting paler and paler. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said something that broke my heart. Even if all of this is true, she whispered, I can't cancel the wedding. The invitations are out. The venue is booked. Mom and Dad have spent $60,000 already. Everyone knows. I can't just, she trailed off. I can't be the girl whose fiancé turned out to be a fraud. I reached across the table and took her hand. You wouldn't be that girl, I said. You'd be the woman who was smart enough to walk away before it got worse. She pulled her hand back. Did you sign the loan? I asked. She didn't answer. Natalie, did you sign the loan? She nodded. 3 weeks ago. Graham said the seed round was closing and they just needed the bridge capital for 60 days. My chest felt hollow. How much? I asked. She took a breath. $225,000 against my apartment, and I put in another $50,000 from my savings as a direct investment in Meridian. He said I'd triple it within a year. $275,000. My sister had given Graham Ashworth $275,000, and the only thing backing any of it was a website with stock photos and the word of a man who had done this exact thing to at least 3 other people. I drove home that night with my hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel, rain hammering my windshield on I-5, and I made 2 decisions. First, I was going to get Natalie's money back. Second, I was going to make sure Graham Ashworth never did this to anyone again, but I wasn't going to do it by begging my sister to listen. She'd already chosen not to. I was going to do it by becoming the one thing Graham never expected to encounter, someone who was better at strategy than he was. The plan took 4 months to execute. I started in January 2024 with a call to Priya Chakravarti at Sequoia West Partners. Priya, I said, I need a favor. A big one. I told her about Natalie's investment, about the loan, about the full scope of Graham's history. She listened without interrupting, then asked what I needed. I need Meridian Dynamics to receive a legitimate investment offer, I said, from a real VC firm. An offer big enough that Graham can't refuse it, structured in a way that requires full financial disclosure and due diligence. She was quiet for a long time. You want to set a trap, she said. I want to create a situation where Graham has to open his books, I said. Because right now, everything is hidden behind NDAs and verbal promises. If a real firm comes in with a real term sheet, he'll have to show what's actually there, which is nothing. Priya thought about it for a week. Then she called back. I can't do this through Sequoia, she said. But I know someone who can help. She introduced me to a man named Felix Drummond, managing partner at Cascade Horizon Ventures, a smaller but well-respected VC firm in San Francisco. Felix specialized in early-stage enterprise software companies. He was also, as Priya put it, constitutionally incapable of tolerating dishonesty. I flew to San Francisco in February and spent 3 hours in Felix's office explaining the situation. He reviewed my file, asked sharp questions, made 3 phone calls while I sat there, and then leaned back in his chair and said, I've seen this before. Charismatic founder, no substance, burns through other people's money. These guys survive because nobody connects the dots. You've connected the dots. Now let's make sure they lead somewhere. Here's what we did. Felix had Cascade Horizon reach out to Meridian Dynamics through a warm introduction, someone in Felix's network who knew Philip Renner from Wharton. The approach was casual, just an investor who'd heard about their supply chain AI platform and wanted to learn more. Graham responded within 4 hours. Of course he did. A real VC firm showing interest was the validation he'd been fabricating for 2 years. Over the next 6 weeks, Felix's team engaged Graham in what appeared to be a standard due diligence process. They requested financial statements, technical documentation, product roadmaps, customer testimonials, team bios, cap tables, and IP filings. Graham provided what he could, which wasn't much. The financial statements showed that $268,000 of the $275,000 Natalie had invested had already been spent. On what? Office lease for a WeWork space Graham used maybe twice a week. Payments to Philip Renner, who, it turned out, was indeed living in Chiang Mai and was being paid $3,000 a month to remain listed as co-founder. Legal fees for the corporate structure. And $94,000 in transfers to Graham's personal accounts, categorized as management consulting fees. My sister's money, her apartment equity, her life savings, paying for Graham's lifestyle while he told her the seed round was closing any day now. Felix documented everything. Every email, every financial statement, every contradiction between what Graham claimed publicly and what the records showed. Meanwhile, I had Douglas Fujimoto contact Catherine Bellingham and the Connecticut investor. Both were willing to provide written statements about their experiences with Graham. Catherine, who had lost $180,000 and spent 2 years recovering financially, was more than willing. She was eager. I've been waiting for someone to actually do something, she told Douglas. I knew I wasn't the only one. He does this. It's what he does. By April 2024, 2 months before the wedding, I had a complete picture. Graham had taken approximately $730,000 from various individuals over 8 years across 3 fake companies. He had never built a real product. He had never generated $1 of legitimate revenue. He was, in the precise legal terminology Helen Nakamura used when I showed her the full file, operating a scheme to defraud through material misrepresentation and omission. She filed a referral with the FBI's Seattle field office on April 15th. Special Agent Thomas Nakashima was assigned to the case. 41 years old, 12 years with the Bureau, specializing in white-collar financial crimes. He reviewed our file, interviewed Catherine Bellingham and the Connecticut investor by phone, subpoenaed Graham's bank records, and confirmed within 3 weeks that the pattern was exactly what we'd documented. But here's the thing about federal investigations. They move slowly. Agent Nakashima told me the case could take 6 to 18 months to develop into an indictment. They needed to be thorough, build an airtight case, ensure there were no procedural vulnerabilities a defense attorney could exploit. 6 to 18 months. The wedding was June 8th. I had a decision to make. I could wait for the federal investigation to run its course, let the FBI build their case, let justice happen on its own timeline. In the meantime, Natalie would marry Graham, potentially sign additional financial documents, become legally entangled with a man who was defrauding her. Or I could act before the wedding and risk everything: the investigation, my relationship with my family, the possibility that I was wrong about some of it. I talked to Helen Nakamura. She advised patience. Let the FBI work, she said. If you blow this up publicly, Graham could destroy evidence, flee, or claim he's being harassed. The investigation could be compromised. I talked to Douglas Fujimoto. He agreed with Helen on the legal strategy but added something that kept me up at night. Owen, he said, your sister is signing a marriage certificate with this man in 6 weeks. In many states, marriage creates shared financial liability. If Graham takes on more debt, which based on his pattern he will, Natalie could be on the hook for it. Every day you wait is a day she gets deeper in. I talked to my therapist, Dr. Anita Rosen, a clinical psychologist I'd been seeing for 3 years. She didn't tell me what to do, which frustrated me, but she asked the right question. What outcome can you live with, Owen? Not the best outcome, the one you can live with. I spent a weekend alone in my apartment, staring at the file, 142 pages now expanded to over 200 with the FBI referral and Felix's due diligence findings. I looked at the numbers. $275,000 of Natalie's money, gone. $180,000 of Catherine Bellingham's money, gone. $200,000 from the Connecticut investor. $75,000 from the Apex Venture Group victims, all gone. All spent on the performance of being Graham Ashworth, successful entrepreneur, charming fiancé, man of substance. And my sister was about to legally bind herself to that performance. I made my decision on a Sunday night. I wasn't going to wait. But I wasn't going to blow it up publicly either. I was going to do something more precise. I was going to give Graham Ashworth exactly what he wanted and let it destroy him. I called Felix Drummond on a Monday morning. It's time, I said. We executed Phase 2. Cascade Horizon Ventures made a formal offer to invest $2.5 million in Meridian Dynamics at a $10 million pre-money valuation. The term sheet was legitimate, drafted by Felix's lawyers, structured as a standard Series Seed preferred stock deal. There was one critical condition. Graham had to provide audited financial statements, a functional product demo, and verified customer references before closing. He also had to disclose all prior business ventures, legal proceedings, and investor relationships as part of standard representations and warranties. Graham was ecstatic. He called Natalie immediately. She called our parents. Our mother called me. They're getting $2.5 million from a venture capital firm in San Francisco. Your sister was right. Graham is brilliant. I could hear the vindication in her voice, the relief that her judgment about Graham had been confirmed, and the unspoken subtext that my judgment, my warnings, my concerns had been wrong all along. I said congratulations and hung up. Graham signed the term sheet on May 3rd. The clock started. He had 30 days to fulfill the closing conditions. 30 days to produce audited financials for a company that had no real revenue. 30 days to demonstrate a product that didn't exist. 30 days to disclose a history he'd spent a decade concealing. He couldn't do it. He knew he couldn't do it. But the term sheet was in his hand, $2.5 million just within reach, and Graham Ashworth had never in his life been able to resist reaching for money he hadn't earned. The next 3 weeks were the worst of my life. I watched from a distance as Graham scrambled. He hired a freelance developer to build a rushed demo of the supply chain platform, essentially a glorified spreadsheet with an AI label slapped on it. He fabricated customer testimonials from companies that had never heard of Meridian Dynamics. He created financial projections that bore no relationship to reality, and he avoided, delayed, and obfuscated on the disclosure requirements, telling Felix's team that his prior ventures were minor and immaterial, that the lawsuits were baseless, that his financial history was clean. Felix documented every lie, every falsified document, every misrepresentation. He forwarded everything to Helen Nakamura, who forwarded it to Agent Nakashima at the FBI. The case was building itself. Meanwhile, the wedding was approaching. Natalie was consumed with final preparations, seating charts, rehearsal dinner logistics, dress fittings. She seemed happy, genuinely happy, and that was the hardest part. I was about to take that happiness away, and I didn't know if she'd ever forgive me. The rehearsal dinner was June 7th, the night before the wedding. Our parents hosted it at a restaurant called Altura in Capitol Hill, private dining room, 14 people, close family only. Graham was charming, funny, warm. He gave a toast about how meeting Natalie had changed his life, how she'd made him want to be a better man. My mother cried. My father shook Graham's hand and called him son. I sat at the end of the table with a glass of wine I didn't drink and a knot in my stomach that wouldn't untie. After dinner, I pulled Natalie aside one last time. We stood in the restaurant's back hallway, near the kitchen, the smell of rosemary and garlic in the air. "I need to tell you something," I said, "and you're not going to want to hear it." Her face hardened. "Owen, if this is about Graham's past again." "It's not about his past," I said. "It's about his present. Meridian Dynamics has no product, no real customers, no technology. The $275,000 you invested is gone, spent on Graham's personal expenses, office rent, and payments to a co-founder who lives in Thailand and does nothing. The $2.5 million investment from Cascade Horizon will never close because Graham can't meet the conditions. He's fabricating documents to try. I know because I arranged the investment offer specifically to expose him." Natalie stared at me. Her eyes were wide, her lips parted, her bouquet of rehearsal flowers trembling in her hand. "You arranged it," she repeated. "You set him up." "I set up a situation where he had to tell the truth," I said. "He chose to lie instead. That's not my doing. That's who he is." She shook her head slowly. "You're trying to ruin my wedding. I'm trying to save you from marrying a con artist." She slapped me. Open palm, right across my left cheek. The sound echoed in the hallway. A waiter carrying a tray of desserts stopped and stared. I didn't flinch. I'd expected worse. "You are not welcome at my wedding tomorrow," she said, her voice low and shaking. "Do you understand me? Don't come. Don't call. Don't contact me. You are dead to me, Owen." She walked away. I stood in that hallway for a long time, my cheek burning, listening to the sounds of laughter and conversation from the dining room. Then I left. Drove to my hotel in silence. Sat on the bed and stared at the wall. Called Julia, my girlfriend of 2 years, who was back in Bellevue because she hadn't been invited to the rehearsal dinner. She listened to everything, said the right things, reminded me that I'd done what I could. "Get some sleep," she said. "Whatever happens tomorrow happens." I didn't sleep. The wedding happened. June 8th, 2024. I wasn't there. I watched from my hotel room as Instagram stories populated. Natalie in her gown, Graham at the altar, our parents beaming, guests throwing rose petals. I felt hollow. After the ceremony, the reception at the Grand Bellamy. 300 guests, open bar, the string quartet, then the 12-piece band, then dancing until midnight. I wasn't supposed to be there. But at 7:30 p.m., sitting in my hotel room in the same suit I'd worn to the rehearsal dinner, I got a call from Felix Drummond. "Owen," he said, "we have a problem." Graham submitted his closing documents to our legal team this afternoon. Our attorneys reviewed them and found falsified audit reports from a CPA firm that doesn't exist. Fabricated customer contracts with forged signatures. And in his disclosure section, he listed 0 prior business ventures or legal proceedings. Every single representation is a lie. We've documented everything, and we're formally withdrawing the term sheet tomorrow morning. But here's what you need to know. I already contacted Agent Nakashima as a courtesy. He told me the FBI has been monitoring Graham's recent activity separately. They have enough. They're preparing to move. He didn't give me a timeline, but he implied it's soon. I hung up and sat there. The wedding reception was happening 15 blocks away. My sister had married a man who was about to be investigated by the FBI for fraud, and she didn't know. Whatever Natalie thought of me, whatever she'd said in that hallway, I couldn't let her wake up tomorrow not knowing. I put on my jacket and drove to the Grand Bellamy. I arrived during the reception. The ballroom was a spectacle of white flowers, golden candlelight, crystal, and silk. The band was playing something jazzy and upbeat. People were dancing, laughing, drinking champagne. I found my way to the edge of the room and stood near a column, scanning the crowd. My mother saw me first. Her face went through several emotions: surprise, relief, then worry. She started walking toward me, but my Uncle Randall got there first. Randall was my father's younger brother, a successful real estate developer in Bellevue, who had never missed an opportunity to remind me that my career choices were, as he liked to put it, puzzling for someone with my education. He had a bourbon in his hand and that familiar smirk on his face. "Owen," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. "Didn't think you'd show. Glad you came to your senses. Great party, right? Your sister really hit the jackpot with Graham." I nodded, scanning the room for Natalie. Randall followed my gaze, then looked back at me with that grin. "Still driving that old Subaru?" he asked. He asked this every time he saw me. Every holiday, every birthday, every family gathering. It was his way of reminding me where I stood in the family hierarchy. The question behind the question was always the same. Why aren't you more impressive? Why aren't you more like Graham? That's when something in me broke. Not spectacularly, not with rage, but quietly and completely, like a rope that had been fraying for years, finally snapping. "No," I said. "I'm not driving that old car anymore. Actually, I just funded the startup that rejected Natalie's husband." Randall's smirk froze. "What?" I said it louder, loud enough for the people at the nearest tables to hear. Meridian Dynamics, Graham's company, applied for funding from Cascade Horizon Ventures. I arranged that introduction. I also arranged for the due diligence process that revealed Graham has no real product, no real technology, and no real business. He's been running investment scams for 8 years. My sister gave him $275,000 and it's gone. Spent on his personal expenses. I have the documentation. The murmur spread outward from our position like ripples in a pond. Conversations dying, heads turning, the band playing on obliviously for another few bars before trailing off as the musicians sensed the shift in the room. Graham appeared from somewhere near the dance floor, Natalie on his arm. His face was composed, but I could see the calculation behind his eyes, the rapid assessment of threat level and damage control options. "Owen," he said smoothly, approaching me with his hands spread in a conciliatory gesture. "This isn't the time or place. I've tried every other time and place," I said. "You made sure none of them worked." My father materialized at my elbow. "Owen, what are you doing?" His voice was a hiss. "This is your sister's wedding." I looked at him. "Dad," I said, "Graham Ashworth has been charged with fraud before. He's run 3 fake companies. He took $275,000 from Natalie, money secured against her apartment, and spent it on himself. I hired a private investigator. I have court records, financial documents, statements from his previous victims. I've been trying to tell you for over a year. Nobody listened. So I'm telling everyone." The room was silent now. 300 people in evening attire, champagne flutes suspended midair, staring at me. Graham's composure cracked. "This is insane," he said, his voice rising. "He's making this up because he's jealous. He's always been jealous of me, of Natalie's happiness. He's a lonely, bitter man who can't stand that his sister found someone successful." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a USB drive. "This contains 200 pages of documentation," I said. "Court records from 3 states. Financial statements showing where Natalie's money went. Witness statements from Graham's previous victims. A forensic analysis of Meridian Dynamics showing it has no product, no technology, and no legitimate operations." I placed the USB drive on the nearest table, next to a half-eaten slice of wedding cake. "I also want everyone to know," I said, "that this information has been provided to the FBI." I didn't look at Graham when I said it. I looked at Natalie. Her face was white. Her bouquet was clutched against her chest like a shield. Her eyes were huge and filling with tears. "I'm sorry," I said to her. "I'm sorry it happened this way. I tried to tell you privately. You wouldn't hear it. I couldn't let you go forward without knowing." Graham lunged. Not at me. At the USB drive. He grabbed it off the table and closed his fist around it like destroying that single copy would make everything disappear. As if I didn't have 12 backup copies in 3 different secure locations, plus everything already submitted to federal investigators. My father grabbed Graham's arm. "Let go, son," he said quietly. "Graham, what is he talking about? What court records?" Graham's mask disintegrated. His face went red, then white. His jaw worked, but no sound came out. His eyes darted around the room, 300 witnesses, all watching, all waiting. He looked like a cornered animal realizing for the first time that the walls were closing in from every direction. "It's complicated," he finally managed. "Business is complicated. There were misunderstandings. I can explain everything. Explain Catherine Bellingham," I said. "Explain the $180,000 she invested in Apex Venture Group that you spent on your apartment and car. Explain Sterling Logic in Connecticut. Explain why Philip Renner is listed as your co-founder but lives in Chiang Mai and has never contributed a line of code. Explain where Natalie's $275,000 went." I pulled out my phone, opened the folder of documents I'd saved there, and handed it to my father. "Scroll through," I said. He did. Slowly. I watched his face change as he read, watched the realization dawn, watched the thing I'd been living with for over a year finally land on someone who could actually do something about it. My mother looked over his shoulder. Her hand went to her mouth. She looked at Graham, then at Natalie, then at me. "Arthur," she whispered to my father. "Arthur, what is this?" Graham backed away from the table. His hands were shaking. He looked at Natalie with something that might have been genuine regret, though I doubted it. "Babe," he said, "let me explain. Please, just let me explain. Everything your brother is saying is twisted around and taken out of context. I was building something real. The money was going to come back. I just needed more time." Natalie stood perfectly still. The most beautiful bride I'd ever seen, standing in the middle of her own reception, holding her bouquet of white peonies and garden roses, and watching her new husband fall apart. She looked at me. "The USB drive," she said quietly. "What's on it?" "Everything," I said. "The court records, the financials, Catherine Bellingham's statement, the FBI referral. It's all there." She looked at Graham. "Is any of what he's saying true?" she asked him. Graham's silence was the loudest sound in the room. Natalie nodded once, a small, tight movement of her chin. Then she turned, walked to the nearest table, sat down heavily in a gilt chair, and started to cry. Not dramatically. Quietly, with the restrained dignity of someone whose world was collapsing and who was determined to hold herself together until she could fall apart in private. My mother went to her immediately, wrapping her arms around Natalie. My father stood between me and Graham, holding my phone, still scrolling through documents. Several of Graham's groomsmen were standing in a cluster near the bar, looking at each other with expressions of dawning confusion. Graham straightened his tie. He smoothed his jacket. And then, with the brazenness that had carried him through a decade of deception, he tried one more time. "This is a family matter," he announced to the room. "I apologize for the disruption. Owen has some personal issues that we've been trying to address as a family. I'd appreciate everyone's understanding and discretion." He looked at me with something like hatred. "You've made your point," he said quietly. "Can we talk about this privately?" I nodded toward the door. "After you. We never had that private conversation." As Graham walked toward the exit, my phone rang. I looked at the screen. It was Helen Nakamura, my attorney. "Owen," she said, "I just got off the phone with Agent Nakashima. The FBI has authorized me to inform you that they'll be executing a search warrant on Graham Ashworth's residence and office within 48 hours. They're recommending he retain criminal defense counsel immediately. Given what you've described about tonight, I'd suggest you leave the venue and let events take their course from here." I hung up and watched Graham disappear through the ballroom doors. He didn't look back. 3 days later, FBI agents searched his WeWork office and the apartment Natalie shared with him. They seized computers, financial records, phones, and files. Graham was informed he was the subject of a federal investigation into wire fraud and securities fraud. He hired a defense attorney, a criminal specialist named Walter Copeland, out of a downtown Seattle firm, and stopped communicating with our family entirely. Natalie moved back into her apartment, the one she'd leveraged for the $225,000 loan. She filed for annulment within 2 weeks on the grounds of fraud. The marriage had lasted 11 days. Her attorney, a family law specialist named Patricia Hong, told her the annulment was likely to be granted given the circumstances. The loan was more complicated. Natalie was still on the hook for $225,000 against her apartment. The money was gone, spent by Graham. She'd need to either pay it back or negotiate with the lender, a process that could take months or years and might cost her the apartment either way. I paid off the loan. I transferred $225,000 from my savings to the lender on July 1st, 2024. I didn't tell Natalie. I had her attorney Patricia Hong handle it quietly. When Natalie found out, she called me crying so hard I could barely understand her. "You didn't have to do that," she kept saying. "After everything I said to you, after I slapped you, after I told you not to come to my wedding, you didn't have to do that." I told her she was my sister and that was all that mattered. She asked how I could afford it. I told her the truth, something I'd never bothered telling my family because they'd never bothered asking. My consulting firm had been generating around $800,000 in annual revenue for the past 4 years. I had savings. I had investments. I had equity in 3 of my clients' companies, startups that had grown significantly since I'd begun working with them. I wasn't rich by Silicon Valley standards, but I was comfortable. Very comfortable. And I'd kept it quiet for the same reason I'd kept everything quiet. Because nobody in my family had ever thought to ask what the quiet son with the old car and the small apartment was actually building. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I'm so sorry, Owen. For all of it. For not listening. For choosing him over you. For letting everyone treat you like you didn't matter." I forgave her. Easily. Completely. Without hesitation. She was my sister. She'd been conned by a professional. The anger I had wasn't for her. It was for the system that had failed her. The family dynamic that had made her vulnerable. The culture that valued surfaces over substance and charm over competence. The fallout continued through the rest of 2024. Graham's FBI investigation proceeded. In September, a federal grand jury handed down a 6-count indictment for wire fraud and securities fraud. Graham pleaded not guilty. His trial was scheduled for March 2025. Catherine Bellingham and the Connecticut investor both agreed to testify. The evidence was overwhelming. Helen Nakamura told me the conviction was as close to certain as these things get in federal court. Graham faced up to 20 years in prison per count, though the actual sentence would likely be far less. Natalie's annulment was granted in October. She went back to being Natalie Sunderland. She started therapy with a psychologist who specialized in victims of fraud and emotional manipulation. She slowly began rebuilding her finances, her confidence, her ability to trust her own judgment. Our family went through its own reckoning. My parents, to their credit, didn't try to minimize what had happened. My father sat me down one Saturday in August, in his study at the Mercer Island house, and said something I'd waited 36 years to hear. "I failed you, Owen. I looked at the surface of things, and I missed what mattered. You were building something real, and I didn't see it because I was too busy being impressed by someone who was building nothing. I'm sorry." My mother wrote me a letter, handwritten, 4 pages. She wrote about how she'd always assumed I was fine because I never complained, never demanded attention, never made a scene. She wrote that she'd confused my independence with indifference, my quietness with a lack of ambition. She wrote that watching me methodically, patiently, brilliantly dismantle Graham's facade had forced her to confront how thoroughly she'd underestimated her own son. Uncle Randall, to his credit, called me and apologized for the car comments. He also asked if I wanted to consult on a data analytics platform for his real estate firm. I said I'd think about it. I'm still thinking about it. It's January 2026 now. The trial is in 2 months. The prosecution's case is strong. Graham's defense attorney has been trying to negotiate a plea deal, but the last I heard from Helen, Graham was still insisting he'd done nothing wrong, that the investments were legitimate, that the business was real. Denial is a powerful drug, especially for someone who's been inhaling their own mythology for a decade. Natalie is doing better. She's been promoted to marketing director at her company. She's dating someone new, a pediatrician named Alan, who drives a sensible car and talks about his patients with genuine warmth. He's not flashy. He's not charming in that performative look-at-me way that Graham was. He's kind. He's real. She seems happy, cautiously, but genuinely. My parents have started asking about my work. Not in the perfunctory way they used to, but with real curiosity. My father reads my company's quarterly reports. My mother came to a tech conference where I was speaking on a panel about data-driven decision-making in small business. She sat in the third row and took notes. It shouldn't have meant as much as it did, but it did. Julia and I moved in together in November. We adopted a dog, a 3-year-old retriever mix named Copper, who has terrible manners and no respect for furniture. We're talking about the future in that careful, hopeful way that people do when they've seen enough to be realistic, but not so much that they've stopped believing. I finally traded in the Subaru. Got a new car, nothing flashy, but reliable and paid for in full, like everything else I own. I think about that moment at the reception sometimes. Uncle Randall's smirk, his bourbon, the question he'd asked a dozen times before. Still driving that old car? The assumption embedded in it, that my worth was visible on the surface, measurable in makes and models and square footage and job titles. The assumption that Graham was more because he appeared to be more, and I was less because I appeared to be less. The assumption that the quiet brother with the data consulting firm and the dented Subaru couldn't possibly be the one holding all the cards. I didn't buy Graham's company or take his job or steal his life. I did something simpler and, in the end, more devastating. I told the truth. I documented it, verified it, organized it, and presented it in a way that couldn't be ignored or explained away or smoothed over with charm. Data doesn't care about charisma. Evidence doesn't care about first impressions. The numbers tell the story, and the story they told about Graham Ashworth was the one he'd spent a decade trying to hide. Sometimes I wonder if I did the right thing, disrupting my sister's wedding, exposing Graham in front of 300 people, choosing the most painful possible moment for the most important possible truth. My therapist, Dr. Rosen, says the question isn't whether I did the right thing, but whether I can live with having done it. The answer is yes. Because Natalie is free. Because Catherine Bellingham and the other victims will get their day in court. Because Graham Ashworth can't do this to anyone else. And because somewhere in the wreckage of that beautiful, expensive, meticulously planned wedding reception, my family finally looked at me and saw not the quiet son, not the background brother, not the guy with the old car and the little job, but someone who had been paying attention all along. Someone who built things quietly and carefully and well. Someone worth seeing. If you made it this far, hit like. You've earned it.